Year 7 and welcome to your next history lesson with me, Miss Thika. Before we get started, I just wanted to say a really quick thank you for those that have already watched and completed the first history lesson that I put on the other day. I was really chuffed when I went back on YouTube and I had a look at how many people had viewed the video, and even though it had only been on I think for like 24 hours, it said I had 65 views, which is really good. Or maybe it's just one person watching it again and again and again and again, but I highly doubt that. So as I've said, I'm going to keep doing these videos. It might not be 2 a week, because as I've found out today, my Wi-Fi doesn't really like putting them on YouTube quickly, so it's taken me nearly 2 hours to upload this one today and to get this all filmed. So it might not be 2 quite quickly. You might have to just bear with me a little bit as I get them all filmed and uploaded. So last lesson we looked at some of the abuses of the Roman Catholic Church, and as a quick check I thought I'd make a little quick quiz to see how much of that information actually went into your head before we crack on with the lesson today. So super quick, 5 multiple choice questions. Let's see what you can remember from the last lesson. Question 1. What was a name given to a person who rebelled against the Roman Catholic Church? Was it A, a heretic, B, a lunatic, or C, arsenic? 2. True or false? A relic could be anything, for example, a feather. It was sold to a person for large sums of money as the church claimed that it had been near Jesus Christ. True or false? 3. What could people buy to ensure that their soul went to heaven once they had died? A, a grievance, B, an indulgence, or C, a pestilence? 4. What is the definition of the act of pluralism? A, when a priest is running more than one church at the same time. B, a priest stealing money from the community. Or C, a priest reading a Bible written in English. And last one, 5. The head of the Roman Catholic Church is the most powerful man in Europe during the medieval times, but what is this person known as? A, the monarch. B, the Pope. Or C, the High Sparrow. So make sure you've written your answers down for the quiz, and then we'll go through the question and the answers now. So 1 was A, which is a heretic. 2 was true. 3, what could you buy? That is an indulgence. 4, pluralism is when a priest is running more than one church at a time. And 5, the head of the Roman Catholic Church is known as the Pope. Okay, so today's lesson we are still sticking with the theme of the Roman Catholic Church, but we are going to look at one specific monarch who had an awful lot of trouble with the Roman Catholic Church. So today, and we're going to be focusing on this for a couple of lessons before we move on to look at Henry VIII's children and their relationship with the church. We are thinking today about why Henry VIII fell out with the Roman Catholic Church, because he fell out with the church big style and made some serious changes to religion, which has an impact on the functioning of our society today. So title, remember you need paper for these lessons. That can be a bit of scrap paper or an exercise book if you've got it. The title is, why did Henry VIII fall out with the Roman Catholic Church? So we're going to be thinking about some of the factors. You are going to be categorising them, and then next lesson we're going to think about the impact of those changes. So first thing I want you to do is have a look at some of these images. You can zoom in if you need to, and then bullet point can you identify, using these images, some of the main reasons why you think that Henry VIII was getting fed up with the Roman Catholic Church? So have a look at some of these pictures and then see if you can bullet point any reasons why you think Henry VIII might have fallen out with the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, so today we are going to focus on 4 specific reasons why Henry fell out with the Roman Catholic Church. To be honest, there are lots of reasons, lots of rather complicated reasons that all link in with one another. But these are your 4 main reasons here. He fell out with the church due to issues with power and control. He fell out with the church due to financial reasons, which finances, it means money. Fell out due to religious reasons, and he also fell out with the church due to rather personal reasons as well. So we're going to be looking at all 4 of these reasons today. So how I would normally do it is you would have like a table to stick in your exercise book, then I would give you the information, you would categorise them. Obviously we can't do that exactly the same as we normally would. So instead I have typed up the information on 4 separate slides like this. I'm going to go through all 4 and then I want you to decide what the factor is. So I'm not going to tell you what the factor is for each slide. I want you to listen to me reading the information out, and then I want you to think, is that to do with Henry VIII's power and control? Is that to do with financial reasons, which is money? Is that to do with religion, or is that to do with something personal to Henry, like his wives or his children, and that kind of thing? Once you feel like you are happy and you have definitely identified the factor, so remember we are looking at 4, once you feel you're happy that you've identified the factor, write that factor down as a subheading, and then get some notes down from the information that I'm about to read out to you. Obviously make sure that you're pausing me as well, so I'm not going through it too quickly. I have put in red some really key words for this topic. I've got a little bookworm down in the bottom here. I want some of you who want to challenge yourselves to try to get down some really key terms for this topic, and you'll know what I mean when I'm reading the information out. I've put some of the key terms in red for you. So, first section, I'm going to read this to you and then you're going to decide which factor this links to. So this is the first reason why Henry fell out with the Roman Catholic Church. So, Henry had a daughter, Mary, and at this point, she was his only child. However, Henry wasn't happy with just having a daughter. He was desperate for a son because he needed an heir to his throne. An heir is another word for someone who is next in line to take the throne. So when the king or queen dies, their oldest child would be the next in line. During this time period, we had never seen a woman inherit the throne before. The throne always went to the oldest son within the family, not the daughters. Medieval Europe was incredibly sexist during this time, and they didn't think that women would be able to rule the country properly. However, Henry didn't have any sons, he only had one daughter. He'd been married to a woman called Catherine of Aragon for 24 years. However, she was much older than him. There was a bit of an age gap between them, and she could not have any more children. They had had a lot of children. However, many of them had died. Some had died when they were only a few days old. Some lasted a few weeks. Some were born dead. So they had really tried over 24 years to have as many children as possible, but for several reasons they only ended up with one surviving child, which was a girl, and in Henry's eyes that was not good enough. So Henry wasn't sure what to do about this, but he came to the conclusion that he would need a divorce. So a divorce is when two people that are married and they decide to split up, to separate. Very, very common during our time period. very uncommon during this time period. He wanted a divorce from Catherine so he could marry another girl called Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn was a much younger woman, and Henry had fallen absolutely head over heels in love with Anne. He was completely obsessed with her. That obsession got worse when Anne promised Henry that if they married and if they became husband and wife, she would fall pregnant and she would give him a son. Obviously, she doesn't know that, but she is just telling him that to try and encourage him to divorce Catherine of Aragon because Anne wants to be queen. So, what's Henry going to do? The Roman Catholic Church does not believe in divorce. It goes against what is written in the Bible. They believe till death do you part, when you are married, that is it. But Henry decided that he was going to write to his good friend, the Pope. And the Pope during this time was called Pope Clement VII. Henry wrote to the Pope, expressed his need for a divorce so that he could marry Anne to gain a son. And Henry was rather shocked because the Pope said no. And Henry was furious about this. He had thought that the Pope would grant his wishes and would allow him to have a divorce, but the Pope said absolutely not. So this is the first reason why Henry VIII fell out with the Roman Catholic Church. So what I want you to do now is think about these 4 factors. Which factor does this link to? Is it power? Is it financial? Is it religious? Or is it personal? And then write your heading down in your exercise book and then get some notes down from this information that I've just read out to you. Remember, if you're wanting to challenge yourself, I've put some of the key terms in red for you and some key names as well. Okay, next one. Henry was a commanding warrior king. People looked up to him as their leader. However, there was a person who was even greater than King Henry VIII, and that person was the Pope. As most of the population of Europe were Roman Catholic, they saw the Pope as their true figure of authority, as their big boss. They saw the Pope as the true leader on earth. The Pope is seen as being almost like God's representative on earth. So the Pope is the one person on the planet that is most connected to God. So in the eyes of Roman Catholics, they didn't look at Henry VIII, if you were English, they didn't look at Henry VIII and think about him as being the ultimate leader. Their biggest leader would be the Pope. Everyone, including kings all the way across Europe, had to follow the orders of the Pope. Henry was fed up of being bossed around by the Pope, who lived in another country. The Pope does not live in England. The Pope comes from Roman Catholic society. Pope lives in Italy, and Henry VIII found it very, very irritating that someone from a different country ultimately had control over the rules and laws that he made across his country. Henry believed in something known as the divine right of kings. We haven't talked about this yet, but divine right of kings is a really old theory which states that kings were born into their position because they were specially selected by God. They've been appointed by God to rule. So, in the eyes of a king, they argue that a king's decision is final and that other people cannot challenge a king because us ordinary people haven't been selected by God, whereas kings and queens have been specially selected by God. So Henry found it very annoying because he believed in divine right. Why should he have to answer to the rules of the Pope when he has been picked by God? Henry wanted more power. He wanted to be able to make his own rules and run his country exactly how he liked. So, same again. Think about your 4 factors: power, financial, religious, and personal, and then get this key information down under the category once you think you have selected the right one. 3. Henry was raised as a Catholic. He was very religious, but nearly everybody was during this time. But Henry was a devout Roman Catholic. However, as Henry became older, he became more paranoid and more concerned that God was angry with him, and he told a lot of his closest friends and advisors that he had upset God. This is because when Henry was reading the Bible, he came across a section in the Old Testament. The Old Testament is the earliest stories in the Bible, so like the book of Genesis, Garden of Eden, that kind of thing. So this is the old part before Jesus Christ enters the Bible. In this particular part of the Bible, it's known as Leviticus chapter 20, verse 16. It says this: "If a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an impurity. They shall be childless." So this is going to take a little bit of explaining from me, unless you happen to know a lot about Henry VIII already. When Henry VIII was younger, before he became king, he was Prince Henry. He had an older brother known as Prince Arthur. His older brother Arthur really should have been king when their dad died, because, as I said to start off with, the throne always went to the oldest son. Arthur was married, so Arthur was married to a princess called Princess Catherine of Aragon. Again, a name that should sound familiar because I said it not that long ago. However, Arthur dies quite suddenly, and the princess, Catherine of Aragon, has moved over from Spain, and she is stuck in England. Her husband has just died. So Henry VIII and Arthur's dad decide that instead of sending the princess back to Spain, they will marry her to Henry. So this is where it gets a little bit confusing. Technically, Henry married his dead brother's wife, which I know sounds very, very bizarre to us, but back then it was seen as good for politics, because England and Spain wanted to become friends, and the best way to do that was through marriage. So they didn't want to send Catherine back to Spain and potentially upset the King of Spain. They decided to keep her and just marry her again, but this time this was to Henry. This is why there is a little bit of an age gap between them, if you remember me talking about that at the start. Because actually, Catherine was older than Henry, because she was originally married to Henry's older brother. But this here says in the Bible that if you marry your brother's wife, you are not pure. And as a punishment, you and your wife will be childless. Now, we know Henry and Catherine weren't childless because they had a daughter, Mary. However, as I talked about earlier, a lot of their children had actually died. So when Henry read this in the Bible, he was convinced that this was the reason why he and Catherine could not have any sons. He was heartbroken to read this because he thought that he had genuinely upset God and that this is how God was punishing him. Henry had always been good friends with the Pope until now. In fact, Henry had been such a devout Catholic that he had been awarded a title known as the Defender of the Faith, which was a special award that only went to certain people who had worked really hard with the church. So this really infuriated Henry. He was cross that the Pope was treating him so badly when, in his eyes, he'd always been a really good Catholic. So he thought, again, as I mentioned earlier, when he wrote to the Pope and asked for a divorce, he was really shocked that the Pope wouldn't grant that to him. Henry was told by his close friends and political advisors that actually he should start his own church, a new Church of England, not a Church of Rome, instead a Church of England. And by doing this, ultimately, Henry would be in charge of religion across his country, because no longer would the Pope be the head of the church. Under the Church of England, the king is the head of the church. So, same again. Think about which factor this might link to. Power, financial, religious, or personal. Put it as a side heading and then get some of these key bits down. There's some really key words in here if you wanted to challenge yourself that you could use to make notes from. And last one. Henry was annoyed by the wealth of the church. The Roman Catholic Church was the largest establishment of the time, and it owned nearly half of all land across Europe. In addition, Henry had to pay a large tax to maintain all of the churches and cathedrals in Rome, which he hated doing, as he didn't see the benefit of this money in his own country. As the king, Henry thought that he should be the wealthiest man. However, the church owned the wealth and the money, and it was not willing to share. The church did not want to release any of its wealth. It wanted to keep it for itself. Henry was sick of running out of money. He wanted the same amount of wealth as the church, which would mean that ultimately he would have more independence to run his country how he saw fit, because he would have the finances to do so. So last one, decide which section this belongs to, write it as a heading, and then get some of these notes down, and just pause me for 1 second whilst you do that. Okay, so hopefully this is what you should have got. Under power, you should have got information from the slide where it talks about the fact that the Pope had more control and more power than Henry, that Henry was fed up that someone from a different country could make decisions from him. Under your financial section here, you should have got information about the fact that Henry was jealous that the church had more money from him. He wanted more money so he could be more independent, and he could launch more wars. Henry did not think that the church needed all of the money that they had. Under the religious section, you should have notes that talk about the fact that Henry was a really religious Roman Catholic. He was cross because he felt like the church was being unfair towards him, and this gave him ideas to maybe start his own church. And finally, for personal, you should have got down information about the fact that Henry was desperate for a son and heir. Catherine of Aragon couldn't have any more children, so Henry wanted a divorce so he could marry the much younger Anne Boleyn, who had promised him a son. So once you have checked that you've got that information correct, you can have a little bit of a think about how you feel about this topic now. So right at the start of the lesson, the enquiry in the title for today was, why did Henry VIII fall out with the Roman Catholic Church? Now you can make a little self-assessment as to how confident you feel with this topic. Do you still think you don't feel confident at all? Do you think, yeah, I know a little bit, but I still don't feel totally confident? Do you think you're in the middle, sort of confident? I'm hoping that most of us now will feel kind of over this side. You feel like you know quite a bit, you're fairly confident, or you're super confident with this topic. Give yourself a little self-assessment. Well, what happens next? 'Cause that is not the end of the story for Henry VIII. In fact, this is just the beginning. Next lesson, we are going to think about what Henry did to try and solve some of his problems with the Roman Catholic Church. And then that's going to lead us to some of our following lessons where we think about the long-term impact of the major changes that Henry VIII made throughout his reign, and the impact that they had on his children when he dies and they take over the throne. Thank you for listening. If you have any issues, feel free to email me, or any questions, email me and send them my way. Thank you.